Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le boonga, boonga. Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Gustabia, on fait le boonga, boonga. Stockholm ou Monaco, ou Montevideo, Oslo, Tokyo, on fait le boonga, boonga. Lima ou Luxembourg.
Hello. Welcome back, dear BungaCast subscribers. Welcome. We're happy to see you again. We're here to do another Aufhebonus bonus, where we have a sort of general chat and also, importantly, respond to your questions and comments that you have made over on Patreon over the past couple of months. So this is the first one we do since last year. I think the last one kind of covered period up till November. So we've got a good couple of things to kind of crack on with, various themes to just, I guess, foreshadow them a little bit. We have a little bit about Brexit, 'cause of course we couldn't let that lie. We have film, art, plenty on the millennial left, and our kind of doomly times. I say as kind of the clouds darken outside. I don't want to lay it on too thick, but anyway, as I have said elsewhere, kind of 2024 kind of giving us 1914 vibes, and we discussed elsewhere on a reading club at the end of last year, which was, I think it was in the second part on Giovanni Arrighi's Adam Smith in Beijing, where we discussed the Belle Epoque, right? So this period which preceded the Second World War, or excuse me, the First World War, ending the liberal world order. It's their numbers. You can get them mixed up, Phil. It's not like I didn't know the history. It's not like anyway. So in that we discussed how things in the 2000s, for example, 90s, 2000s, 2010s even perhaps, but certainly the 90s and 2000s might have been similar to the period preceding 2013. Oh, fuck me. Jesus Christ. I just can't do numbers.
Slap yourself.
Look,
get Dre to do it.
Oh no, you can actually hear that in the mic.
Yeah.
Look, they're numbers.
Anyway.
People get numbers confused. 1, 2, 3.
Anyway,
All
I
the
just
same.
yeah. Right.
World Wars. How many have we had? Who knows?
The 90s and 2000s might have been similar to the period preceding 1913, and the period preceding that. And so Phil just has a piece in UnHerd. Hi, Phil. How's it going?
Hi. Good.
And George doesn't have a piece, but he's trying to grow one.
I may one day have an UnHerd article.
I thought you were going to say a penis there.
No, I mean I think all of my articles are heard, so maybe, but with an A in. So.
I was just trying to trick. Can you trick people into a Freudian slip? Well, that's what I was trying to do. Anyway, but Phil's piece is about Lenin, as he is wont to write about, and how his period and the period preceding the Great War compares to ours. So I guess just to start off with, I mean, are you getting these kind of? I don't want to lay it on too thick and to suggest that we're on the precipice of a world war. I don't think it's quite that, but there are kind of 1914 vibes, or maybe like early 1910s vibes in terms of the ratcheting up of international tensions, and indeed two ongoing wars, particularly which you would want to highlight in terms of Ukraine and Israel and Palestine, and the latter particularly seeming to have the potential for becoming a wider regional war, and the risks of that. So you guys just vibe check here.
Yeah, I mean, the piece that you mentioned, it was written on the 100th anniversary of Lenin's death. And so it wanted to, I mean, the reason the Belle Epoque was raised was to draw attention both to similarities and differences between the two periods. So, it was a period of early peak globalization and liberal world order of a very different kind, and obviously different in terms of its politics. And the most significant difference that I put down was the fact that there was no serious organized working class movement that was in a position to challenge for power at the level of and also maintain consistency with its own demands for stopping a drift towards war. So, as the Second International did at their major congresses in the run-up to the First World War, but then notoriously failed to abide by them. So, I mean, on the on the 19 kind of where we sit, it's again, it's kind of the similarities and the differences are kind of equally instructive. So again, we're kind of exiting a period of liberal globalization in economic terms, and an era which, very similar to the era of the Belle Epoque, has been dominated by tremendous kind of polarization of wealth, tremendous economic advances and wealth creation, a period of relatively open borders in terms of economic migration, and also globalization kind of culturally and politically, not just economically, is seen in some of the, seen in many kind of facets of society. And we've talked about it plenty, I mean, not just in the Reading Club on Origi, but also in many different facets. I mean, if you recall, we talked even about kind of global cities as a phenomenon of that era, the corporate class headquarters springing up in overpriced urban centers in all different parts of the world as a result of the era of low interest rates and investors piling into property as a response to the finance of that era. So, there's plenty of similarities. I suppose, I mean, and at the same time, recently seems to be this kind of coordinated push throughout the Western world to try and get citizens thinking in terms of their military, their willingness to participate in the new security demands potentially coming out of a Trump administration that will put pressure on other Western states to up their defense budgets. And as well, I think it's more generally governments kind of seeking to find ways to manipulate their citizens. So, there's been a big brouhaha in the UK over the possibility of conscription. But really, I mean, it's completely unreal as a prospect.
It was kind of laughed out, right? It was laughed out of
Yeah,
court.
even by the Tory government. So it was a senior general kind of who was on the brink of stepping down, said we might have to consider conscription or a citizen army. And it was coincided with a poll published by my former colleague from the University of Kent, Matt Goodwin, who it indicated that something like, I think, 30% of people between the age of 20 and 40 would not only refuse to fight for Britain in case of a third world war, but actually refuse to fight if Britain was under threat of imminent invasion, which is
Wow.
an even more remote prospect than a world war. I mean, the Russians can barely occupy the Russian-speaking part of eastern Ukraine, let alone kind of sweep across the continent and threaten us from across the channel.
Why assume it would be the Russians? It's the French. They've long harbored designs on this country. So, I mean, it would depend how all the Germans,
I
let's
think
be
it's
fully xenophobic.
I think it's because I think it's mainly because Macron is such a liberal weenie that I don't think he really poses a threat in terms of the military threat that he poses to Britain. Plenty of threats to the liberties and rights of the citizens of France, of course. Anyway, the point is right that there is kind of a clear effort to screw up tension, but I think the big kind of the chat about conscription indicates how far we are from the world of 1914 with the notorious kind of pictures of crowds thronging plazas, the Kitchener poster for the imperial war effort in the UK. We're very far from that, and I don't think they're realistically trying to remobilize. I think what they're doing, it's very much kind of information warfare. It's kind of manipulating expectations at the edges. It's kind of what it really is, I think, is trying to make clear that we're going to expect to pay more in terms of taxes, and we have to get for a defense budget, and also accept the fact that there will be that the deep state is essentially trying to re-legitimate itself in the aftermath of lockdown and the pandemic. And I think plenty, I imagine plenty of them think that another war would be something along the lines of lockdown, and I'm by no means the first to say this, but I think, they have a kind of a template for an emergency
in what
period
regard?
that doesn't, sorry?
Yeah, in what regard? I mean, what does that look like? That people are made to stay at home, or
not if made to stay at home exactly, but I mean that they have. I mean, we probably would be right, but that there is a kind of a flexible service economy that can function, and telecommuting and so on means that you could keep state, society, and economy functioning without requiring a vast kind of effort and social mobilization. So whereas the kind of the default mode of the operation of the imperialist state in the run-up to the First World War was popular. I mean, that was the point of the Kitchener poster. And everybody, the equivalents in France and Germany and Russia. Whereas that kind of default response doesn't exist. So it's kind of, it's gaslighting, essentially. I think all the kind of talk about conscription and trying to get, it's not as if they genuinely want, they couldn't risk the kind of political, political change that would be needed to get people ramped up to that level of popular intensity to be willing to actually fight a world war on that scale.
No, I think that is a very good point. Just right at the end, the risks of the mobilisation that would be required to have a rerun of the PALS battalions, for example, in World War One, which was all these, young, often very young guys going and kind of enlisting together and often dying together as well. Like that, we're so far from that from that situation now that to kind of to give young guys guns. We've all seen Full Metal Jacket, and that go to those kind of training facilities. Like that's an absolutely that's a big risk. Like why not just keep the population demobilized and as you were saying, Phil, you have drones or Deliveroo kind of bring in some people some food, and the war is far off.
So I mean, it's funny that it's not funny at all actually, but in terms of men with guns, young men with guns, someone recently referred to some kind of crazy shooter going up and killing a bunch of people and then shooting himself, something like that. Referred to it as the lone wolf years of lead. This is the age that we're coming into, to use another historical reference. So this is like it's like the politicized violence of Italy in the 70s, except that it's just individuals being nihilistic. And that sort of violence you can imagine increasing. But I mean, I'm going out on a tangent. I think what's interesting.
That's interesting because it's kind of from bowling alone to posting alone to shooting alone.
Going postal alone.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, not to be facetious about it, but there is something about that complete atomization and nihilism. Sorry,
although you'd say that the kind of turn of the century was characterized in part by anarchist bombings, which themselves were. I mean, I don't know how you could do a comparison between that and sort of Islamist terror and kind of far right nationalist terror and whatever.
Yeah, it's been today, done, but I mean, it's a very telling comparison. It's in Victor Serge's Memoirs of a Revolutionary, because that was the kind of the crowd he began with, were anarchist bank robbers and terrorists who were casual about the civilian casualties or the non, that kind of occurred during their various raids and shootouts and so on. But it's it's nothing on the scale of kind of deliberately targeting crowded places with the sole aim of killing as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And the anarchists, despite for all their limitations, I mean, it was the era of kind of targeted political killings, which was the majority. The bulk of anarchist violence was targeted against, or kind of anarchist adjacent violence was targeted against politicians, American presidents, Italian kings, Russian czars, as well as their various kind of ministers. So it was, again, kind of a contrast. And to that extent, and I think it is worth stressing, in some ways, the Belle Epoque was a genuinely more civilized era than the equivalent of the late 20th, early 21st century era, not least in the fact that even the terrorists tended to be more civilized in terms of the way in which they sought to wreak their kind of nihilistic violence, I suppose. But anyway, the main purpose of the retrospective on Lenin was less to praise him than to bury him. Which is to say that we're kind of dealing with the failure of, and this is the main point of the piece, is that we're dealing with the failure to overthrow that era of authoritarian capitalist geopolitics that arises out of the decay of periods of liberal globalization. And we're still stuck within that cycle, within that repetitive cycle. And Lenin's was, the last kind of serious, heroic, and ultimately doomed effort to break out of that. And its failure, and we're dealing with the historic legacy of that failure to break out of it. And so that's the real point of the piece, is that there's no way to really understand Lenin's politics without understanding the fact that he and his followers were they embodied the most serious political effort to reverse the Great War, for which everybody else was culpable. And so Lenin was, for the kind of reputation that he still has as being this kind of sectarian fanatic who ruthlessly kind of fragmented the socialist movement of the day. His politics was the one that was consistent with the promises of the pre-war socialist movement as a whole, which they said would prevent the breakout of a war by all means necessary, including force, general strikes, and revolutionary seizures of power if necessary, and they failed to do so. Whereas Lenin was consistent with that politics, as was shown in pulling revolutionary Russia out of the war. And that helped to end the Great War itself, because it undercut the German justification for the war and thereby helped to precipitate the revolution, which led to the armistice on Germany's side.
Yeah, nice. No, I think on the point about burying Lenin, not praising him, this of course still needs to be done in the very physical sense, right? Because you've got Lenin's embalmed body still above ground. So if there's any Russian listeners who are inspired by Phil's piece and they dig a hole and throw him in, do let us know.
Well, hello, listener. I hope you like what you're hearing. It's a short excerpt from an episode that's available only to subscribers. Want to support BungaCast and get at least 2 original episodes a month? Sign up at patreon.com/BungaCast right now. $5 a month patrons get access to exclusive episodes like our in-depth analyses of present history. The big stuff that's happening right now. As well as chats with our regular guests, extended interviews with the key thinkers trying to understand our world today, and much more. For $10 a month, you join the BungaCast Reading Club, the place for those of us who are serious about equipping ourselves with the necessary intellectual tools for understanding the world and seeking to change it. Phil, George, and myself, Alex, look forward to seeing you there. Patreon.com/BungaCast.